Network with me, Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Russia is holding its annual Victory Day parade at the Red Square in Moscow. This year marks the 81st anniversary of the Soviet Union's victory in the Great Patriotic War. The May 9th parade is Russia's most revered national holiday, celebrating the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany and paying homage to the deceased. The Kremlin says this year's parade will not include tanks or other military equipment. Russia and Ukraine have agreed to a 3-day ceasefire and an exchange of 1,000 prisoners. A welcome ceremony was held prior to the parade for foreign leaders, including Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, Lao President Tonlun Sisulit, and Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico. Washington is awaiting Tehran's response to a peace proposal to end the war, even as the two sides exchanged fire. On Thursday, Iran attacked 3 U.S. destroyers in the Strait of Hormuz, while U.S. forces attacked Iranian oil tankers in several locations around the strait. The U.S. is continuing its blockade of the strategic waterway. The military says it has prevented more than 70 ships from entering or leaving Iranian ports. Walter Morris reports now from Washington.
Donald Trump says 3 U.S. Navy destroyers were attacked as they moved through the Strait of Hormuz. Trump wrote in a social media post that the American ships weren't damaged, but the Iranian forces were hit when the U.S. fired back. And despite the recent fighting, the Trump administration says the ceasefire is still in place. Friday, officials in the United Arab Emirates said 3 people were injured in the latest attacks from Iran. The country's air defense system reportedly engaged 2 ballistic missiles and 3 drones. Earlier in the week, the UAE Foreign Ministry described the attacks as a serious escalation and a direct threat to the country's security. The clashes between American and Iranian forces come as the White House waits for a response to its latest peace proposal. This week, Washington submitted a 1-page memo to mediators in Pakistan. The temporary agreement would formally end the conflict and prevent more fighting. Reuters reports the framework of the deal would play out in 3 stages by formally ending the war, reopening the Strait of Hormuz, and launching a 30-day window for more negotiations. Tehran and Washington have reportedly scaled back their goals of a more permanent peace deal. The latest proposal doesn't address the key issues of Iran's nuclear program and the future of its highly enriched uranium. However, the partial deal could end the standoff over the Strait of Hormuz. Friday, U.S. Central Command released new video of naval forces disabling 2 oil tankers. About 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas moved through the strait. It has effectively been closed since the war began in February, leading to a global energy crisis. In response to the closure, the U.S. imposed a naval blockade on Iranian ports. The U.S. military says it stopped 70 ships and redirected 50 others. For days, Trump has said he thinks Iran wants to make a deal soon. And Friday, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio described the latest round of fighting like this.
Operation Epic Fear was an offensive operation designed to destroy their missile launches, their Navy, their Air Force, and it achieved that, and their factories, and it achieved that. What you saw yesterday was U.S. destroyers moving through international waters being fired upon by the Iranians, and the U.S. responded defensively to protect itself. That's what you saw. That's separate and distinct from Operation Epic Fury.
The Trump administration says Iran's control of the Strait of Hormuz is unacceptable. At last update, the U.S. military says more than 1,500 ships are stuck in the Persian Gulf because of the closure. Walter Morris, CGTN, Washington.
Meanwhile, Iran has condemned U.S. attacks on its oil tankers and multiple locations along the coast of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's Fars news agency has reported sporadic clashes between Iranian armed forces and U.S. vessels in the waterway. Iranian Foreign Minister Sayed Abbas Araghchi, meanwhile, has slammed Washington for what he calls a reckless military adventure. Ihsan Kivani reports from Yazid in southern Iran.
A big part of Iran's political system, what you'd call the hardliners, has always seen the Strait of Hormuz as its ace in the hole. The right-wing newspaper Kayhan has been pushing for years to punish the U.S. and its regional allies by shutting down the strait. Over the past weeks, we've already seen huge swings in global energy markets. So here's the takeaway from what main decision makers, including the IRGC, are saying. Iran is not going to lose that card easily, not unless they're offered serious benefits in return. The hardliners also like to point out that even after a possible deal with the U.S., reopening the Strait would not be permanent. It's reversible. They could do again later if the other side doesn't stick to its promises on any issue. In a post on X account, Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi summed up the broader dynamic, saying whenever a diplomatic solution is put on the table, the United States turns to a reckless military adventure.
Meanwhile, UN Chief Antonio Guterres is urging all parties to exercise maximum restraint to prevent further escalation in the Strait of Hormuz. He has expressed concern about the recent exchange of fire between the U.S. and Iran. Tehran accused the U.S. of violating the truce, while the U.S. military said its actions were self-defense. Guterres has called on all parties to respect the ceasefire agreement and avoid actions that could escalate tensions or damage ongoing diplomatic efforts. Elsewhere, leaders of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations have voiced concern over the war in Iran. They have issued a joint statement at the ASEAN summit in the Philippines, aiming to strengthen the bloc's response to global energy shortages and supply disruptions. Now, the statement includes coordinated emergency fuel sharing, diversifying oil sources, and studying new technologies like civilian nuclear energy. Gretchen Malalad reports now from Cebu in the Philippines.
There was strong sense of concern among ASEAN leaders over the escalating conflict in the Middle East and its growing impact on hundreds of millions of people across Southeast Asia. The two-day summit in Mactan, Cebu brought together leaders from 11 countries to coordinate measures aimed at cushioning the region from the economic fallout, with President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. chairing the talks. The regional bloc released a statement calling for an immediate cessation of hostilities and urging all parties to return to diplomacy and peaceful dialogue. Leaders also stressed the importance of protecting civilians, maintaining freedom of navigation, and ensuring the uninterrupted flow of vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, a critical route through which roughly two-thirds of the region's energy supply passes. President Marcos Jr. later held a press conference outlining the bloc's urgent priorities, including energy security, food security, and the protection of ASEAN nationals overseas. On energy, leaders are pushing for the faster rollout of the ASEAN power grid and a regional petroleum sharing mechanism. Investment in renewable energy and cross-border power connectivity are also being accelerated to reduce dependence on food security. Leaders agreed to strengthen regional trade, keep essential goods moving, and support agricultural supply chains to help prevent shortages during future crises. Another major priority is protecting the millions of ASEAN nationals living and working in the Middle East. Leaders agreed to improve coordination, accelerate information sharing, and strengthen evacuation and emergency assistance mechanism.
Our discussions made clear that ASEAN should not just react to crises. We must anticipate, prepare, coordinate, and act together. We must maximize existing ASEAN-led mechanisms. We must strengthen our institutions. We must deepen cooperation with our partners in accordance with the ASEAN Charter.
Leaders also discussed plans to establish an ASEAN Maritime Center aimed at strengthening regional maritime cooperation and serving as a platform for maritime policy coordination, although details of the framework are still being finalized. Gretchen Malalad, CGTN, Mactan, Cebu.
The World Health Organization says the Hantavirus poses a low global public health risk. It says the Hantavirus has been known for decades and it is not highly contagious and does not spread easily from person to person. Now, the outbreak was first reported on the MV Hondius cruise ship, with 5 confirmed cases so far and 3 more suspected cases. The ship carrying 150 people will dock in Tenerife, Spain this weekend. The WHO says it will continue tracing efforts. The outbreak has triggered a major international public health response across Europe, Africa, and Latin America. The U.S. CDC says American passengers aboard the luxury liner will quarantine in Nebraska. Owen Fairclough has more.
As Spanish health officials try to contain the hantavirus outbreak aboard a cruise ship, their U.S. counterparts are reportedly monitoring passengers who returned home, including one in Arizona, according to state health officials.
This individual is asymptomatic, hence very, very low risk for anyone in the community. This individual was indeed in that cruise ship, but we have no proof that this individual is even infected.
President Donald Trump, who was in office for his first term when the COVID-19 pandemic began, said officials are monitoring the outbreak.
It's very much, we hope, under control.
Health officials in Argentina say the outbreak may have spread from individuals who caught hantavirus on a birdwatching trip in the southern city of Ushuaia, where the cruise ship departed in early April. In 2025, 28 people in Argentina died from the virus. It can spread from rodents, and initial symptoms are similar to flu. But with an incubation period of up to 8 weeks, it can be difficult to detect, and there is no specific treatment. The US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the risk to the public is extremely low. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has set a July 4th deadline for the European Union to implement trade deal commitments before he raises tariffs on EU goods. EU trade officials have pushed back, saying the bloc's legislation cannot be dictated by such threats. It comes as the US Trade Court ruled on Thursday that Trump's latest 10% global tariffs are illegal. William Denslow reports now from Brussels.
We've heard from Bernd Lange, who's the chair of the International Trade Committee in the European Parliament. Now, he says that this ultimatum set by Trump, as Bernd Lange describes it, as well as this ruling from the court in New York, provide proof that the EU, in his mind, is right to stand firm against Washington's threats. He says that European policy is governed by democratic procedures and not a social media post. Now, for the European Union, it's not as simple for the European Commission President to just shake hands with President Trump, as we saw in Turnberry, Scotland last summer. It still has to go through the European Parliament and indeed those 27 EU member states for it to come into force. Now, why the delay? Well, a major reason for this is that at the start of the year, we saw Donald Trump threatening to impose tariffs on a number of EU member states because of that spat over Greenland. That essentially prompted the European Parliament to put on pause that vote on whether to ratify this deal. That vote has now been made, but there are still wranglings about whether clauses should be added, safeguards should be added to this trade agreement, because so much trust has been eroded between the EU and the United States. However, Lange is optimistic that the European Commission, Parliament and Council can come together to reach an agreement. Whether or not that includes all of these safeguards, that remains to be seen. But he says he is expecting progress the next time these institutions gather on May 19th.
Well, we leave it there on this edition of The World Today. Do stay tuned. I'll be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Mali Foreign Minister briefs diplomats on insurgent attacks while ruling out talks with terrorist groups. South Africa and the WHO scramble to trace contacts linked to deadly Hantavirus outbreak. And the UN pushes Sudan and South Sudan to resume Abyei talks amid rising violence. Wherever you're tuning in, welcome to Africa Live here on CGTN with me, Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Here's what else is coming up. In business, South Africa's Western Cape testing electric taxis designed specifically for Africa. And in sports, train costs to New Jersey's MetLife Stadium slashed for this year's FIFA World Cup. We begin in Mali, where the government is seeking to reassure diplomats and regional partners following coordinated insurgent attacks that have raised fresh concerns about security across the Sahel. Foreign Minister Abdoulaye Diop met ambassadors on Thursday, insisting the country's response goes beyond military action. CGTN's Joy Kiruki Juma with the details.
Mali's Foreign Minister Abdoulaye Diop has defended the country's security strategy following a series of coordinated attacks by insurgent groups across the country in recent weeks. Speaking during a meeting with ambassadors accredited to Mali in Bamako, Diop said the fight being led by the Alliance of Sahel States, known as the AES, was aimed at protecting not only the Sahel but wider regional security.
This struggle in which the AES Confederation is engaged is being carried out for collective security. I would even say for collective security far beyond the Sahel region.
The meeting comes after a wave of attacks on April 25th, demonstrating the ability of armed groups to launch coordinated assaults across multiple locations in Mali. The violence triggered renewed fighting across the country's north and intensified concerns about instability spreading beyond the Sahel.
Of course, our response is not solely security-based. It is holistic and includes political dimensions, geopolitical dimensions, social dimensions, but also development.
Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger have all faced insurgencies for more than a decade. The three military-led governments withdrew from the regional bloc ECOWAS and formed the Alliance of Sahel States, promising closer security cooperation. At the meeting in Bamako, Morocco's ambassador to Mali, Driss Isbayen, reiterated Rabat's support for Mali.
We remain ready to support Mali so that it may fully restore its sovereignty over all of its territory, and so that peace, security and stability may prevail in Mali and throughout the region.
Analysts say the recent attacks highlight the persistent security challenges facing the Sahel, despite intensified military operations by regional governments. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Suspected fighters from the Islamic State West Africa province, or ISWAP, attacked a Nigerian army base in the northeastern town of Magumeri in Borno State. Nigeria's military says 3 soldiers were killed and several others injured after militants attempted to infiltrate the forward operating base during the early hours of Thursday. Security sources say the commanding officer was among those wounded. Troops reportedly repelled the assault, killing several militants and recovering weapons, motorcycles and ammunition. Parts of the base and some equipment were also damaged by fire during the fighting. In South Africa, the National Department of Health confirmed that authorities are currently awaiting test results for an individual in the Western Cape linked to the Hantavirus outbreak. The individual is one of 4 people being monitored by health officials there. The group was identified through contact tracing related to the Hantavirus outbreak on the MV Hondius. Meanwhile, a British patient airlifted from the vessel remains in critical condition in a Johannesburg hospital. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
South Africa's race to contain the Hantavirus after it unexpectedly landed in the country is now focused on the Western Cape. 4 people are being tested here for the Hantavirus, which is carried by rodents. They were on board an Airlink flight between St. Helena and Johannesburg with a Dutch woman that took ill at OR Tambo International and later died in hospital.
So far, 4 people have been contacted as part of contact tracing in the Western Cape. And out of all that, we managed to identify 2 suspected cases because they displayed or experienced similar symptoms as Hantavirus. They've since been sent for laboratory testing.
The woman was returning home to the Netherlands after losing her husband, who is thought to have also died from the virus. They were sailing from Argentina to Cape Verde on a luxury cruise ship when the tragedy struck. A British man airlifted from the same ship to Johannesburg tested positive for the virus and is being treated at Santon Mediclinic.
The patient is still in critical condition in isolation ward, but is receiving sufficient medical attention. So for now, we have not received any update since the morning, but the latest report that we received yesterday is that he's in critical condition.
The World Health Organization has meanwhile urged calm, stressing that a pandemic is not likely as tracing continues for fellow travelers, airport, hospital and port staff.
The species of hantavirus involved in this case is the Andes virus, which is found in Latin America and is the only species known to be capable of limited transmission between humans. None of the remaining passengers or crew on the ship are currently symptomatic.
The news of the virus has sent shockwaves around the world and has stirred some concern among South Africans.
I've heard about the hantavirus. When you retire, you listen to all the news. So I've heard about it. I don't know much about it, but like the COVID changed our lives, I'm concerned what the position is on the hantavirus.
We get very nervous and we get very scared that what's going to happen and what is it government is doing for us actually if there's things like this.
WHO has warned that more cases could still emerge as the world waits out the virus's 6-week incubation period. But health officials say South Africa's rapid response in identifying the virus, isolating patients, and tracing possible contacts may have already helped prevent a far bigger outbreak. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town.
Well, still in South Africa, the country's top court has revived impeachment proceedings against President Cyril Ramaphosa over a $4 billion cash heist scandal. Ramaphosa is accused of hiding details about a 2020 break-in and theft of cash from his game farm from police and tax authorities. The court ruling centers on allegations by a former intelligence official that Ramaphosa sought to cover up the theft. Ramaphosa survived an impeachment motion in 2022 when lawmakers from his African National Congress party voted to reject a report that recommended a full investigation. Now, the report found evidence suggesting that Ramaphosa may have committed misconduct, allegations that he denied. The court says the vote was inconsistent with the Constitution and must be set aside. Now, reacting to Friday's ruling, Ramaphosa's spokesperson said the president respects the court's judgment and that no person is above the law.
The National Assembly's vote must likewise be set aside because it was taken under an invalid rule that prevented the National Assembly from properly determining whether a ground for impeachment existed. The vote, therefore, lacked a lawful foundation. By a majority, concludes that the report must be referred to the impeachment committee.
President Ramaphosa respects the Constitutional Court's judgment and reaffirms his commitment to the Constitution, the independence of the judiciary, and the rule of law. President Ramaphosa has been consistent in providing his full assistance to the various inquiries into this matter. President Ramaphosa maintains that no person is above the law and that any allegation should be subjected to due process without fear, favor, or prejudice.
The United Nations is pressuring Sudan and South Sudan to resume stalled talks over the Abyei region. The UN Security Council this week heard fresh warnings about deteriorating security in the disputed region. UN officials say rising violence, weapons proliferation, and unauthorized armed groups are worsening instability. At the same time, the conflict in Sudan continues to fuel a humanitarian crisis. Here now is CGTN's Sharon Baranga to tell us more.
Senior UN officials say that the political situation in Abyei remains deadlocked amid conflict in Sudan and instability in South Sudan. Assistant Secretary General Martha Pobi told the UN Security Council that progress towards resolving the territory's final status has stalled.
The political environment in Abyei remained constrained by the conflict in the Sudan and instability in South Sudan. This situation limited progress by the two countries towards resolving their disputes over the management of the Abyei territory and its final status.
Pobi told the council that security conditions have sharply deteriorated over the past 6 months, driven by criminality, weapons proliferation, and the presence of unauthorized armed groups. The UN Interim Security Force for Abyei, known as UNISFA, recorded nearly 200 security incidents during the reporting period.
UNISFA recorded 196 security incidents, with 58 fatalities and 69 injuries, marking a significant increase from the previous reporting period.
The UN official called for the immediate withdrawal of all unauthorized forces from the area, including South Sudanese forces and Sudan's Rapid Support Forces. Meanwhile, UN Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Guang Kong, warned that the conflict in Sudan continues to place enormous pressure on neighboring South Sudan.
Since the start of the war in Sudan in 2023, over 1.3 million Sudanese refugees and South Sudanese have fled to South Sudan. This massive influx has compounded an already dire humanitarian situation.
South Sudan's ambassador stressed that both countries remain committed to bilateral engagement despite ongoing crisis.
The Republic of South Sudan and the Republic of Sudan continue to be engaged bilaterally as we undergo our both difficult situations. And we are continuing to keep our bilateral relations as great as they could be, and with the attention in mind that the stability in both Sudan and South Sudan, it's for the safety of both of our countries.
The
Sudan reiterates that the sustainable solution to the Abyei issue can only be achieved through dialogue and genuine cooperation between the two countries, away from any escalation or unilateral measures to safeguard the interests of the people of Abyei and promote lasting peace in the region.
Abyei has remained disputed since South Sudan gained independence in 2011, with both countries claiming the oil-rich territory. The United Nations says sustained international engagement will be critical to preventing further instability in the region. Sharon Baranga, CGTN.
Kenya is preparing to host the inaugural Africa Forward Summit in Nairobi next week. This will be the first ever Africa-France summit held in an English-speaking country, signaling a shift in French diplomacy on the continent. Ahead of the summit, Kenya's Prime Cabinet Secretary Musalia Mudavadi granted CGTN Africa an exclusive interview.
This is significant in the sense that it breaks this barrier where we have always wanted to look at Africa as Francophone, Anglophone, Lusophone. All right? So this is a very good step in the sense that the issue of the language limitations is being set aside. So we think that's a very important thing. The second thing about this summit is that it is bringing together almost 32 nations, and most of them shall be represented at the highest level, at head of state level. And then the third aspect of it is that it will also be a forum on day one, that is on the 11th, where there is a very elaborate business forum being conducted. And this will bring together investors from the continent and beyond the continent to interact, to talk, and we hope that there'll be quite a number of very, very important and significant business deals being signed during this business forum.
So what was Africa's agenda at this summit?
Africa's agenda is literally one, a new Africa, an Africa that is ready to engage an Africa that is not just about to be told what to do, but an Africa that says that this is what we want, and we now want to engage on terms that are acceptable both ways. So it is not business as usual. Yeah? So this is a very, very important summit, a very important convention, so that Africa can actually change the narrative and define the direction it wants to take going into the future. All right? We want to see value addition. We want to see jobs created on the continent. We want to see our raw materials being processed more on the African continent. And we also want to have broader integration in Africa itself. We want to be able to also change the narrative in terms of how the future will view Africa.
The summit is coming at a time when we have seen various global powers courting Africa. So how will this one be different?
I think it's a good thing to see a renewed and a certain surge of interest in Africa. Competition is important, all right? So if these countries are competing, I want to look at it in the context that their businesses, their investors, their potential manufacturers are looking at Africa differently, okay? So we are not going to be put in a situation where we are in a straitjacket as a continent. Take it or leave it. This is an opportunity for us to look at this competition strategically and be able to say that what do we draw that is in the interests of Africa.
Is Africa ready to, for example, take advantage of these courtships?
Yes, it is. That is why we are here. That is why we are strategizing. The global geopolitics has just taught us something. In the Middle East, where a lot of our fuel, fossil fuels in particular, come from, what is the lesson here? The lesson is we have to diversify as Africa, okay? A few days ago, President Ruto was in Tanzania. And one of the instruments that we signed was an instrument that will allow us to co-invest and have a gas pipeline running from Tanzania to Mombasa, because Tanzania has gas reserves. Can you picture a future where our gas reserves will only be a few hours away, piped to Mombasa and distributed to the homes? We will not have to rely on gas from the Middle East.
The Central African Republic is facing a severe long-term displacement crisis, with the UN saying 1 in every 5 people there are displaced. Attacks by armed groups and community-level clashes fuel the displacement, with children and women particularly affected. An official from the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, who has just returned from a field visit in Zemio, a town housing several displaced people, describes the number of people in need as stark. Caroline B. with that report.
Briefing reporters in New York, the Director of Operations and Advocacy at the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, says the Central African Republic, a country of around 6 million people, has about 2.3 million people in need of help. Most of them are people displaced by long-term violence and natural disasters.
We say that 1 in every 5 Central African Republicans is displaced. The numbers are a bit, stark, I would say, but it's difficult to juxtapose progress in fragility, in security, progress in stability, with me saying at the same time their needs.
Edem Osonu also focused on gender-based violence facing women, girls and children.
You hear of a lot of cases of gender-based violence, mainly by the armed militia or armed actors in the area. Significant numbers reported. UNFPA shared the reduction in the reporting, not because it's not happening, but because we don't have the ability as humanitarians to be all over the country.
The UN official highlighted humanitarian projects that were improving living conditions despite limited funding.
FAO's resilience project is quite fascinating to see. People are farming their lands when there's security, when there's peace, obviously. Farming their lands and, sustaining themselves with the produce. A mobile clinic that comes twice a week to into the settlement because people can't move into the town for risk of their lives, for fear of their lives. This mobile clinic by Alima supporting some 60 to 70 people every time they came a day.
But the UN warns if the health situation is not improved, the risk of communicable disease outbreaks risk getting worse. The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is also appealing for more funding to raise $268 million to keep millions of people surviving. The country also faces pressure on its limited resources as refugees from Sudan, DRC and Chad fleeing violence in their home countries stream into the Central African Republic. Caroline B., CGTN.
Now, African nations are making a growing impact at this year's Venice Biennale, with more countries debuting at the world-renowned art exhibition. From Somalia's poetry-inspired pavilion to Senegal's installation exploring mineral wealth, artists are using the global stage to tell deeply personal and political stories. CGTN's Sharon Baranga with that report.
At the heart of the art world, African countries are claiming their place. For the first time, Somalia has opened a national pavilion at the Venice Biennale, transforming a Venetian building into a space inspired by a traditional Somali home. Poetry lies at the center of the exhibition, reflecting a centuries-old tradition of storytelling and preserving culture.
So poetry is a very, very important way to deliver a message, to compose idea. Is the way generations to generations Somalis was able to sort of transmit knowledge and stories. So poetry is the backbone of a Somali social structures and history. So as the Biennale partly is sort of exploring poetry, this was sort of the aim to use poetry structure making in contemporary exhibition.
The pavilion features works by artists including Ayan Farah, whose installations explore the connection between humans and the natural world.
I do tend to make quiet works and meditative, serene. I don't always think of them when I'm making because sometimes it's really stressful and trying to source them from the location. But I want them to draw the viewer into that environment. And because a lot of the works I make are supposed to be how nature affects the human and how human interacts with nature. So I hope in the way I've installed them and the materials they're made of, it's going to draw you into that environment even though you're not there.
Nearby, Senegal's pavilion examines humanity's fascination with gold. Artist Caroline Guye uses sculptural works to question why societies place such value on precious metals and the conflicts that can follow.
The
potential of art is sometimes to reverse perspectives, because the very nature of gold is that it has value, and these values are what make people to fight to preserve that value. Okay, but why do they fight? They fight simply over questions of perception, really. Perhaps other people, or even in another universe, which is a possible universe, would have reasons not to fight for this metal, would have reasons to use it for something else.
At Ethiopia's pavilion, artist Tegene Kubi explores silence through large-scale abstract paintings filled with bold color.
The idea for this, just like the exhibition, is just like creates from and shape of silence. How to create it. So silence is not absence. Silence is just like presence, and we'll see these abstractions to see the colors, the form, silent art color, silent art form.
And South African artist Gabriel Goliath brings an installation shaped by controversy after disputes over a tribute to Palestinian poet Hiba Abu Nada. Now on display in Venice, the work reflects how this year's Biennale is becoming a platform for conversations about identity, politics and memory. This year marks the debut of 4 African nations at the Venice Art Fair: Guinea, Equatorial Guinea, Sierra Leone and Somalia, highlighting the continent's growing presence on the global art stage. Sharon Baranga, CGTN.
Right, it's time for another short break here on the program. Here's what's coming up in business. South Africa's Western Cape testing electric taxis designed specifically for Africa.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Right, let's shift our focus to the business, where minibus taxis move millions of South Africans every day, and they still are the backbone of urban transport. But with crude oil prices having risen by over 65% as supply lines in the Persian Gulf are disrupted, both operators and commuters are under immense financial pressure. Now, researchers in the Western Cape are testing electrical taxis designed specifically for markets here in Africa. Julie Shire with that report.
From sunrise to sunset, South Africa's minibus taxis keep cities moving, transporting millions of people every day. But rising fuel costs are squeezing operators and commuters alike. South Africa imports most of its oil, which means every global supply shock lands directly at the taxi rank. Now researchers at Stellenbosch University are working on a longer-term fix.
We need to decarbonize our whole system, including our transportation system. So in the South African context, we can decarbonize our electrical system quite easily. And then if we can continue with that and e-mobility, then of course we can make a significant contribution towards reduction of CO2 emissions in the world.
Professor Tinus Boysen leads the university's electric mobility lab. His team is converting minibus taxis and other vehicles to run on electricity generated from South Africa's own solar energy.
We're expecting a whole revolution of electric mobility. And what we do at this lab at Stellenbosch University, the Electric Mobility Lab, is to try to prepare for that. Everybody's aware of the petrol and diesel and oil price at the moment just because of the massive increases we've seen. If we can convert to electric mobility, we're actually going to generate our own electrons with our own solar energy.
For PhD researcher Joshua Selo, this isn't abstract. He rides taxis every day.
I take taxis every day, and I'm seeing now a lot of people are going to be impacted by this. And I'm a believer in using electrification as a means to make our energy sovereignty and our mobility access a bit more equitable and cheaper for a lot of people.
The lab's converted electric taxi has already clocked more than 5,000 kilometers of testing, but the team's ambition goes beyond the taxi rank.
The concept is actually quite ingenious and simple. They started with an electric taxi, and then they went into a personal vehicle, and then they decided that maybe they needed a bakkie for rural Africa.
That same thinking has been applied to a personal vehicle, a converted VW Beetle that now runs entirely on electric power. But obstacles are real.
It's so smooth.
Yeah, it's a lot less noisy than the old Volkswagen engine, isn't it?
The old petrol one.
The old petrol engine, yeah.
In South Africa, we need support, legislative support, and we need some government incentives to actually help us to push. So we do not have the charging infrastructure yet for a large-scale electric vehicle rollout. But then also it costs money to put those chargers in place. And therefore, if there's not enough demand, then there's not enough incentive for the suppliers of that.
Still, South Africa's taxi industry could become an important testing ground for electric mobility across Africa. Julie Scherer, CGTN, Stellenbosch, South Africa.
In Ethiopia, a flagship trade and industry expo made in Ethiopia is helping drive rapid growth in the country's manufacturing sector. According to Ethiopia's Ministry of Industry, the sector's annual growth rate accelerated from 4.8% in 2022 to 10.7% by 2025, with much of the progress attributed to the Made in Ethiopia initiative. Now, the annual expo showcases locally manufactured products, promotes industrial investment, and plays a key role in advancing the country's import substitution efforts. Becca Atoma reports now from Addis Ababa.
From locally assembled electric vehicles to drone systems and heavy-duty machinery, the Made in Ethiopia Expo showcases the growing capability, innovation and industrial potential of Ethiopia's manufacturing sector. Launched 4 years ago, the annual Made in Ethiopia Expo has become a major driver of local manufacturing, creating stronger market linkages between producers and consumers.
This is the fourth time we participate in Made in Ethiopia. In Amharic we call it Ethiopian Tamret. We come here to show our products. Mainly our company is engaged in agricultural implements. This kind of exhibition brings a lot of opportunities to the manufacturer, especially engaged in manufacturing, not only assembly. You can get a lot of customers that doesn't know Ethiopia can manufacture products like this.
The exhibition has been great. We welcomed a large number of visitors, many of whom had no idea that products like these could be manufactured locally, and they were highly impressed. Those in the health sector were particularly encouraged to see that this medical equipment can be produced domestically, and many pledged to buy from us. So we built a strong market link and, most importantly, raised significant awareness about our work.
For customers, the expo provides an opportunity to purchase machinery using local currency while also benefiting from easier and more accessible maintenance services.
Every stuff here, what we have been seeing here is produced in Ethiopia. That is really very amazing. This is a very small machinery which we intended to plant in Addis to have a coffee roasting process. And we already paid in advance to have this machinery. We can easily fix it if we have problem with the machine. It has many benefits. Also, we don't have dollar or foreign currencies to buy from abroad. Now we can buy in Ethiopian birr.
The Made in Ethiopia Expo has helped revitalize the country's manufacturing sector, with export earnings from manufacturing rising from $358 million to $434 million since the initiative began. The domestic market share of locally manufactured goods grew from 30% to 46% within the same period, helping the country save over $14.5 billion through import substitution.
The import substitution is one of the most strategic. We identified 96 different items to substitute in Ethiopia. We saved only the last 9 months $4.85 billion US, and this will help us as a country to balance the trade, because we used to import more than 17 to 18 billion US. Now, if we substitute already for $4.85 billion, then we will continue to be self-sufficient, and we cannot be sovereign country depending on another country's products.
Beyond its economic impact, the Made in Ethiopia Expo is showcasing Ethiopia's growing manufacturing capability and increasingly becoming a symbol of national pride in locally made products. Becca Atoma, CGTN, Addis Ababa.
Heading to North Africa now, where Morocco is accelerating its push into artificial intelligence, betting on the sector as a new engine of economic growth and digital transformation. CGTN's Adnan Shawashi explains.
AI is becoming a key part of Morocco's 2030 economic strategy, with plans to expand digital infrastructure, sovereign data centers, cloud services, and AI use across industry, logistics, agriculture, in public services.
Artificial intelligence is becoming a major driver of investment and innovation. Morocco is engaged in this path through its 2030 strategy, backed by an investment package of nearly $10 billion. This new digital infrastructure could create significant job opportunities, generate high-value employment, and strengthen momentum across multiple sectors of the economy.
But implementation remains the main test, from regulation and digital readiness to whether SMEs can adopt AI at scale, while Morocco balances foreign partnerships with domestic value creation.
The Moroccan government is moving towards a new approach that places artificial intelligence at the heart of scientific research, social development, economic protection, and job creation. Companies are also being encouraged to use AI as a tool to strengthen the foundations of the national economy and support future growth.
The North African country is also framing AI as a tool for competitiveness, innovation and data sovereignty, while linking universities, businesses and research centers to turn ideas into practical applications.
Artificial intelligence has become an urgent necessity and is now present across all sectors in Morocco. It has also become integrated into a range of public policies, particularly those linked to the development of digital platforms.
The goal in Morocco is to turn AI from a policy ambition into a real economic transformation, with success depending on how widely it spreads across the national economy. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN.
Right, let's jump straight into the sports news. FIFA will hold separate opening ceremonies prior to the first game in each of the 3 host countries for this year's World Cup. Now, the World Cup kicks off on June the 11th in Mexico City, where Grammy award-winning Mexican pop band Mana